Good morning. Good morning, everyone. I'd like to welcome you all to the RMP annual meeting. Thank you all for coming this morning. I would like to start today with, I would like to offer a land acknowledgement that was developed through the collaborative efforts of the original Native people of the San Francisco Bay. The San Francisco Estuary Institute and most of the stakeholders of the regional monitoring program located throughout the San Francisco Bay reside on the ancestral territory of the native peoples of San Francisco Bay, including the numerous villages and tribes of the Ohlone, Patwin, Coast Miwok, and Bay Miwok. We recognize that through a violent history of colonization and dispossession, today, as guests, we benefit from living and working on the traditional homeland of these native people. We wish to show our respect to them and their ancestors by acknowledging the injustices inherent to this history and by affirming their sovereign rights and their current efforts to achieve restorative justice. I have some tips. We are hosting in a hybrid format today. It is important to note that we here in person in this auditorium will not be able to hear or see our virtual audience. And for those of us joining virtually, please update your name and add your affiliation. I want to encourage participation from our virtual audience, so please use the chat function if you have a comment, question, or technical issue. We have a dedicated Zoom moderator here in the auditorium for each session who will be able to voice questions from our virtual audience for the speaker or panel. For those of us in the auditorium today, while we may be able to hear each other across the room, the virtual audience will not be able to hear anything that is not spoken directly into a microphone. So if you're up here speaking, please remember to speak into the microphone. And if you go like this, no one's going to hear you. So try to keep speaking into the microphone. And then when it's time for questions from the audience, we'll have 2 mic runners with microphones. So please wait until the mic is in front of you before you ask your question. Otherwise, our virtual audience will not be able to hear it. All right. So now I would like to introduce Dr. Tom Mumley. He helped create the San Francisco Bay Regional Monitoring Program. And before retiring last year, Tom worked at the San Francisco Water Board for over 40 years. Tom participates in several, if not all, of our work groups. He's been a member of the steering committee since 2007, and he's been the chair of the RMP steering committee since 2011. Please welcome Tom Mumley.
Well, thank you for that introduction, and welcome everybody. Good morning and welcome to what I like to call a celebration of joint fact-finding by what we consider the premier collaborative-based monitoring program on the planet. And we're just getting better and better. We have a lot going on to share with you today. It's been an interesting year, to say the least, especially the last 9 months. And probably most noteworthy is, despite some anxiety and some delays, we're fortunate to have secured the additional EPA funding from the San Francisco Bay program that we anticipated and started with this year. So that's great news, and it means, as I like to say, we can do more and more better. That means we can enhance our status and transmonitoring program, in particular include more contaminants of active concern, CACs, that's my term. And we can also do more pilot and special studies to inform actions related to legacy contaminants like mercury and PCBs and active contaminants of concern, including in microplastics and sediment management. So we're in great shape to, as I say, to do more better. We're also able to enhance our communications. And one thing you'll note that we have now hired a lead person for communications, Sierra Garcia, who's on the program, and she'll, noteworthy, there's an article in this year's annual report, the update, authored by Sierra on how we're using the EPA funding. Most noteworthy. Of course, there's always the Jay's top 10 highlights of the year that you'll see in there. So, so read it often. What else do I want to say here? Oh yeah, of course, another benefit of the extra resources, now we can have more meetings, which which is a pleasure for me because I actually obviously retired. I have more bandwidth, and one of the exciting things, fun things I get to do is participate in pretty much everything Regional Monitoring Program. It's a lot of fun, and I encourage you though, I know you all have day jobs, but to the extent that you can engage in any of our work, the more you engage, the better we'll all be. So I appreciate that. So you notice from today's program, we are covering essentially all areas of the Regional Monitoring Program. I already called attention to Sierra. Unfortunately, we've had to rearrange a couple things, or I think because of the government shutdown, we were going to have a presentation from Jesse Lacey from USGS on sediment transport to marshes. It's an area that we are beginning to give more and more attention to, a major part of our sediment work group activities. But we've had to rearrange things, but we still have a robust program. One thing you also note at the last session, which typically would have 3 presentations, we only have 2 as we were organizing things, and when we had a scheduling issue, we opted to not try to find a replacement and just use the extra time, if you will, to end early and actually allow, but we don't have to rush out of the building like we have in the past. If you notice in the past, we quickly get corralled out. We have to be out by, I believe, by 5. But it gives us a few moments to have some social interaction after the meeting as well as during the meeting. And by all means, as many of you as possible, I encourage you to go across the street to the social affair at the Jupiter. So before going into the program, it's with a heavy heart, I have to call attention to and remember 2 key members of our Regional Monitoring Program family that we've lost this year, Mike Connor and Trish Mulvey. I mean, both of them were champions that supported the Regional Monitoring Program, and I know personally they had a profound positive impact on me, and I know they affected many of you as well. So let me get my picture up here. Go to the laptop. Go the other way. Okay, Mike Connor. Mike Connor came to us in 1999 when he became the executive director of the Estuary Institute, and I pretty much easy to say he was a game changer. He was a brilliant scientist as well as a manager, so his impact was so profound, particularly in enhancing communication between scientists and managers. Those of you who worked with him, he was a character. He pushed. He didn't hold back. I really enjoyed bantering with Mike, but he was incredible. I look
at him as like an intellectual athlete, skill, and arguably one of the best ever to
San Francisco Bay. Yeah, tremendous person. Now Trish Mulvey, this is a recent picture of her, but she was involved as probably the quintessential citizen activist advocate since I think about 1989 when she had retired. So she spent all the retirement years being a passionate advocate for Bay-wide issues, South Bay, Lower South Bay, the wildlife refuges, the watersheds down there. She was a tremendous force of bringing people together, bringing collaboration as part of the spirit of things, particularly bringing public agencies and environmental advocacy groups together. So I really, really much appreciate Trish. Trish, hugs. Hugs was her sort of signature goodbye. So, but I like all of us to reflect on both the power and impact that we've all experienced from Mike and Trish. And in their spirit, let's all continue to work together and continue to make the Bay Regional Monitoring Program as good as it can be. Now, lastly, before we get into the program, I have some additional sad news, because some of you may know, or even perhaps they took classes with Professor Dick Luthi at Stanford. Fortunately, he passed away last week. And so, again, I had the pleasure of experiencing his brilliance and enthusiasm in water quality engineering and sustainable water systems. He was an instigator and a champion of the Bay Area One Water Network, and I commit, and I know many of you are also going to be involved in making that a reality, that we're going to maintain the Bay Area One Water Network. What is the Bay Area One Water Network? Google it. It's a very good thing. And speaking of the internet, I wanted to call attention to the fact that our regional monitoring program website is up and running and much better than ever. It's I consider it much more user-friendly, and access of information is easier. So please check it out if you haven't, and give us some feedback, through me, through Jay, through any of the staff. So with that, that's my introduction. Let's get on with the show. And I'm going to stay up here because I'm the moderator for this first session, which is focusing on a combination of issues that are interrelated: stormwater monitoring and some CACs or CECs. I've started saying I don't like emerging contaminants because they're not emerging. They've been around, and we're actively concerned about them. But I mean, CECs has a life of its own. So we have three great speakers from the Regional Monitoring Program staff. Matt Heberger, who is recently, although he used to be with the staff previously, but went off, got his PhD, but now he's back. We really welcome him. He's leading our watershed modeling work, but he's going to talk about what we're up to in terms of stormwater monitoring, particularly the integration of monitoring and modeling. And then this all-around engineering scientist, athlete who's superbly informed so much we do, Don Yee, is going to give a presentation about one of his other talents is that he can build things, and he's been a leader in developing a new sampler as part of our stormwater monitoring program. So we'll look forward to that, maybe even have a chuckle or two. And lastly but not least, Ezra Miller, who is the toxicologist, a key player of our CECs program. She's going to give us a presentation on non-targeted analysis of CECs in sediment. And if you don't know what non-target analysis is, you'll get a look at it, but it's going to be part of how we do business. It has become as part of how we do business in the regional monitoring program now. We don't, other than just targeting specific contaminants, it's a toolbox that allows us to look at broader classes of contaminants and even find individual ones that we may not otherwise be looking for. So it'll be a great program. So that's my introduction to it. Let's start with Matt. Come on up.
Thanks, Tom. All right, great. Thanks, Tom. I appreciate Tom because he can sit with me and talk about watershed monitoring and modeling for hours. And I always leave the conversation with some useful nuggets and history. But I'm here to talk about watershed monitoring and modeling as the co-lead of the Sources, Pathways, and Loadings work group of the RMP. And I definitely want to acknowledge, let's see, page down. What do I need to press here? Do I need the clicker?
This is that one. No?
No, it's not working. Oh, there we go. So when it comes to mobilizing for storms and sampling stormwater, we have an extraordinary and dedicated crew. And I'm really speaking on behalf of my co-lead, the first picture there, Alicia Gilbraith, who's really I've never seen someone get so excited about stormwater sampling. Like, it doesn't matter if you're a desk jockey, you work at SFEI, you want to get out there in the middle of the night and get your feet wet. Actually, your feet won't get wet because we've got great rain gear. But beyond that, I don't know, maybe other folks, if you're in the room, raise your hand. Martin, Ezra, Dawn, Diana, Jennifer, who's really taken a lot of leadership this year. Kaylee, a lot of leadership with the remote sampling program. Kyle, David, Emma. And then our newest SFEI staff member, Sasha, who just joined a couple weeks ago. And then also my partner in crime when it comes to modeling, Pedro, who's remote in Indiana, but he and I talk a lot, and he's one of our other modelers. In addition, once we collect all this data, our data services team, we've got Brooke and Adam, they're responsible for all the data management, the quality assurance, the web visualization. We've also got a great set of science advisors, John Butcher from Tetra Tech, Tom Jobs, James Limbrunner at Tufts University, and then through a project, we had some funding to get some advice from Paradigm, and Steve Carter, and whose picture I forgot to put, and John Riverson have been great, really experienced watershed modelers. So the bottom line, stormwater transports non-point source pollution to the bay, and this sort of conceptual diagram is based on monitoring and analytical work that was done to inform the TMDL, the total maximum daily load, back in 2003, and it was estimated that the total load of mercury to the bay at the time was about 160 kilograms per year, and the sources vary. Some of it's coming in from the Sacramento and San Joaquin rivers, the delta. There's atmospheric deposition, all of the combustion that happens in Asia, power plants and coal, various sources. The Guadalupe River, which has its history of mining of mercury, quicksilver for the gold mining industry back in the gold rush days. But then urban stormwater. You know, when the city takes a bath, what do you do with the dirty water? The answer is a lot of it flows into the bay, and it brings all sorts of things with it. The RMP is a world leader at monitoring CECs and other contaminants as well. And the program has really ramped up in the last few years. In the most recent water year, 2025, we monitored 17 sites for a variety of analytes, PFAS, the so-called forever chemicals, which you'll hear more about in a bit, and legacy contaminants, PCBs, mercury, metals, various ancillary parameters like sediment and oxygen demand, various things. And it's a mix of remote sampling, which you'll hear about from Dawn in a little bit, and manual sampling, where we're out hanging over the edge of bridges, grabbing samples, we're popping manholes, all sorts of things. Legacy pollutants do remain an important RMP priority. We've done extensive monitoring of PCBs and mercury in stormwater, over 80 sites since 2015. We've been doing it continuously since 2011, starting in 2011, continuously since 2015. And in the last couple of years, 2023 through 2025, a lot of the data collection has been really focused on helping us to inform our models, to help calibrate and validate our watershed models. Another really exciting study in the last couple of years, this is a $1 million plus study, the optics study, and you'll hear more. Sam McWilliams from Integral Consultants will talk about this, but it's delivering really important insights into PCB loading in San Leandro Bay. And I kind of came into this assuming everyone knows what PCBs is. If you've been associated with the RMP, it's a class of industrial chemicals that were widely used. They're banned in 1979, but they're really long-lived and they accumulate in the food chain. And it's one of the reasons you see, you know, the warning posters for fish around the bay is that you shouldn't be consuming fish tissue, which has PCBs. They're really harmful to wildlife and to human health. But this optics study, it's collecting this high frequency. It's sitting at the bottom of the channels and collecting high frequency, like every 15 minutes, the flow of water, the turbidity. And then in addition, we've gone out and grabbed some grab samples of PCBs to see how it's correlated with the things that we can measure in situ in real time. So it's generating data from these 7 locations around San Leandro Bay, which is one of our priority margin units. It's highly impacted by pollution, but we also think it's an area that could potentially recover quite quickly if we're able to reduce the inflow of pollutants, manage the sediments properly. So this is really, it's exciting to me as a modeler, having all this like really high frequency data. We're going to be able to really refine our models for this region. We also do a number of special studies which help us inform study design and fill information gaps. Just an example of a study from the last couple of years, a microplastics depth profile plot pilot, which tried to answer a really specific question, which is when we go out and sample microplastics, you know, they're a variety of different particles and materials. They float in the water column. Can we just take a single grab, or do we need to take a depth integrated sample? If we could just do a single grab, that would save a lot of time, a lot of money, but we don't know. No one's asked this question before, so we're doing this innovative science to try to figure this out. I see what happened. When a thing pops up saying someone's in the meeting and I admit them, it takes the focus off the screen, and that's what's preventing me from going forward. Note to the next speaker. Okay, the stormwater program, the monitoring program, has grown more sophisticated in the last few years to keep pace with the increased demand. We're taking more samples from more locations. We've got more people who are involved. And this has taken a number of forms. We've got some, thanks to the RMP steering committee, in their wisdom, allocated some funding to help us do this. We've got a new internal website. These great labels is the most obvious for me as a desk jockey who goes out and samples a couple times a year. They're beautiful, waterproof with a QR code. You know, we don't have to write on the bottles anymore. But a lot of staff training and capacity building has taken place, and more use of technology, which lets us just collect more samples at more locations with more precise timing, so that we're really getting the right part of the storm and with fewer staff. And this is just a screenshot from our internal website. It's very clever before the storm, during the storm, after the storm. And one of the first links is Bay Area hospitals. I hope to never have to use that. Safety training is a really important part of our training as, you know, field hands. Okay, in the last 3 years, the RMP has really rethought our strategy towards stormwater. The Sources, Pathways, and Loadings Work Group strategy was updated in 2024. We wrote an integrated monitoring and modeling strategy that also came out last year. And then right now, this is, many of you have seen this in your inbox if you're on any of the RMP committees in the last month or so, our integrated watershed and bay modeling strategy. But really the bottom line from this is that increasingly we are relying on our models to help answer important management questions. And monitoring, we're always going to be doing monitoring for a variety of reasons, but it's increasingly being done to support model development and calibration. So we've got really shifting from monitoring to the modeling side, which is what I do all day. We have 2 primary watershed modeling tools. We've got a spreadsheet model, which has been around for, I think, about a decade now, and it can estimate average annual loads at sort of regional and watershed scales. And just a few years ago, starting in, I think, 2021, we started developing the watershed dynamic model, we call it. It's dynamic because it can make predictions. It's simulating the mechanisms of rainfall and runoff, sediment and pollutant transport in the watershed and in the channels. And it's a detailed mechanistic model. The platform is LSPC, which is just one of the models which was developed by EPA over the years. It's a descendant of HSPF, if you've ever heard of that. It's a model that's in widespread use. It's been used in hundreds of studies for TMDLs around the country, water quality. But it lets us simulate hourly or daily flows and sediment loads in addition to lots of other things. So a really, it's going to be I think a very useful tool for the RMP in the future. And it's already, the WDM, our watershed model, is already being used across the RMP. Pilot PCB modeling in the San Leandro Bay, pilot study of dilution of a conservative tracer in Lower South Bay, which will help inform CEC monitoring strategy and understand how they're being transported. These next ones are not RMP projects, but they're projects within SFEI, the nutrient management strategy for the bay. We'll be using the model for that. Sand sediment science modeling and climate adaptation in the Petaluma River. So we're currently working to improve the model's predictions of flow and sediment. I've been pretty frank with a lot of my of you that have talked to us about modeling, about some of the limitations of the model and trying to make that ever more accurate. But our goal is to have a useful model of PCBs and mercury, and we've mined 30 years of monitoring data. So it really shows the value of having a long-standing monitoring program that can collect this kind of data to help inform models, because we've got these samples from all around the bay. Land use is a really important factor to developing what we call potency factors or sediment concentrations. And we do see, from mining these thousands of samples of soil samples and sediment samples from around bay watersheds, there's a huge variety in the concentrations that we see, but they are correlated with various land uses. And so developing new and better land use data sets is an important initiative for us as well. And we've also collected an extensive calibration data set. This is the in-stream data that we use to verify that our model is making good predictions. So we've begun integrating the WDM with the in-bay FATE model, the tracer study that I mentioned in the South Bay. I'll go through this quickly, but our vision is really over the sort of medium term, the next few years, to have an integrated suite of models. We already have an in-bay hydrodynamic model, which models the flow and sediment transport within the bay. It's always getting better, but we're hoping to, and we're already starting to link our watershed model, where we have outputs from that going into the bay model, simulating the transport and fate of contaminants from the land surfaces into the bay, and then ultimately that'll feed into a food web or bioaccumulation model to tell us what we really care about, which is the concentration of a pollutant in fish tissue, bivalves, bird eggs, mammals, different things like that. And so ultimately, we should be able to model the trajectory of bay recovery under various scenarios. This figure is from the first iteration of the PCB TMDL in 2010. It was based on a relatively simple mass budget and box model of the bay, and with increasing sophistication and numerical modeling, we should be able to see, as we decrease the loads to the bay, how fast the bay will recover. So we have a roadmap for enhancing our watershed model. I'll let you read this because I'm running out of time, but we're working on basically getting better input data, incorporating more information about the channels, and in the future, we should be able to simulate a wide variety of different contaminants and ask a bunch of different what-if questions. So contributions from watershed science. Monitoring modeling is helping us to better understand sources, pathways, and loadings of pollutants and sediment to the bay. Watershed models are a flexible, cost-effective tools for exploring a wide range of what-if scenarios, possible futures. And if any of you ever want to talk modeling, give me a call or an email, and be happy to tell you more. And I think we have 2 to 3 minutes for questions before the next speaker, if there are any. But if you have a question, raise your hand and wait for the microphone. Or if there are none, I'll turn it over to the next speaker.
Go ahead, Richard.
There's an audience plant.
Yeah, one of, so I'm a regulator, and so in addition to, kind of just advancing our capacity for understanding, loads to the bay from these various pollutants, we also use the fruits of these efforts to, get sort of very detailed in terms of our permitting of regulated entities, so like in particular stormwater. And one of the really long-lasting and impactful results that we've used in stormwater permitting are the land use-based yields that came out of a modeling effort with the spreadsheet model. And so these get used extensively in the permit to determine the sufficiency of efforts, a permit to permit basis. So we can't really expect the stormwater programs to be dynamically determining what has been the impact of these control measures on the loads to the bay from the various watersheds. That's, like an intensive effort, a lot of resources. So instead what we do is we regulate based upon the expected load reduction benefit of a unit of effort for various kinds of control measures. And what that's come down to for many of them is, depending upon the composition of land use that's affected for the control measure, we allocate a unit of credit. And this method has been used for now like a couple of permit terms, and I think that it's getting long in the tooth. So I guess I would, it's not really so much a question, it's more of like an exhortation for us collectively to work together toward, trying to fine tune this a little bit, because we're in a position to do better now with the watershed dynamic model. So I would encourage you and all of us to kind of think about a better way to come up with, what is the expected benefit for a unit of control measure activity in this area versus this area, not only considering, I'm really kind of speaking for PCBs. I should have said that, because that's kind of really where it's most pertinent. But, there has to be something better that we can do just besides land use, but something about, its proximity to a conveyance, the slope, the type of, hardscape or whatever. So that's kind of my comment. It's more of an exhortation. And if you had any thoughts on maybe, what we could do about this.
Thanks for spinning that into a question. Yeah, this is consistent with our vision for why we're doing the modeling and where it's going. It's in our multi-year plan for exploring different what-if scenarios. I didn't spend a lot of time talking about that, but one of those scenarios is what if we implement different control measures on a much bigger scale? Green stormwater infrastructure, stormwater BMPs. What impact would that have on load reductions for contaminants, including PCBs? And making this model not just something that we use, but something that the community uses. I want it to be a community model that anyone can download, use, consultants, academics, even municipal staff, sure. So, and I see no time remaining, so thank you.
Okay, thanks for this opportunity to talk to you guys about a project that we've been doing at SFEI over the past couple of years, developing a remote stormwater sampler. Tom isn't a fan of subtitles. He says, we're only a single session, we don't have to attract people, but I couldn't resist. I subtitled Rise of the Robots, because we're building robots. So our core team, lead scientists or mad scientists, depending. And then Kelly's been on the hardware team drilling and soldering all sorts of things for us. Lorenzo is our software developer. He writes the programming for the actual boxes. And then Rachel is web UI. So we're developing sort of a web-based form that the people can kind of control the samplers from. It's not just us, though, because we have a backing team. Fortunately, we live in the Bay Area. My longtime friend and ex-Googler, Stephen Eng, helped with some of the early development of software. Kelly's partner, Mark Elliott, also another retired software engineer, helped with development of the second version of the sampler. And then Kelly and Gemma are kind of the cat herders, reining us in when we're kind of like getting sidetracked by all these interesting kind of functions we want to introduce, and they pull us in and say, hey, we're going to go over budget if you do all that. So So we're thankful to everybody who helped us on the back end too. So what are the challenges of stormwater sampling? Well, we're not perfect. In the time I've been here, I feel like weather forecasts are much better than they used to be, but they still miss, so sometimes we predict it too early, too late, bigger or smaller than it actually ends up. Sometimes we're also limited by tides, so some of these channels are tidal, and you say, ooh, it's raining, but it's a high tide, and oh gosh, okay. So in the past, we used to just give up and say, we can't sample this because we don't know how saline it's going to be, how much it represents stormwater. So there'd be very narrow windows, and we play conservative when we get a lot of these spots. Also safety factors, sort of like Matt mentioned, first thing on the checklist is all hospitals, but hopefully we don't need them, but it's still dangerous, right? It's late night, poor visibility, really dark, everything's wet, right? Hazardous conditions, so some of these channels are really high flow, speedy. I mean, the first time I went to East Sunnyvale, I looked at it, said, well, it's flowing like 3 meters a second, going under Highway 101 for about 100 yards. I really don't want to fall in here, right? So, and of course, it always rains at like 1 a.m. when you're like, oh, got to get up and take another sample. So, after a while, that gets kind of old. So, sort of the biggest thing, though, is that, Matt showed our lovely team, and we have other people at SFI chip in, but we only have a certain number of people. And we have lots of watersheds that we want to get to, but, not that many people. So, few rain events per year. Unfortunately, it's not like continuously raining. And so we have to decide which places are most important. We don't have enough people to spread around. So, not a lot of sites. So although we have superhumans working at SFI, they're not the same as having superhumans. So, for example, we have Ezra, but she's not staff. Ezra Miller is also not even the actor who plays the Flash. So, remote robots to the rescue. How can they help us? Well, remote, we mean still in the Bay Area, but not like sitting next to it. So we're not talking about going to the Yukon and sampling. They don't need sleep, or not a lot of sleep. So they sleep like your phone goes to sleep, a minute at a time, and you touch it and it wakes up again, right? And potentially, as many sites as we want, we could build a number of robots. So, we have like 40 some watersheds that we want to get up to. So if we had 40 robots, we could do them all at once. We're probably not going to get to that, but we could hit a much larger number than we could with just humans. So, the ambition is to build a network of web-connected robot samplers that we can use. And I was thinking, what should we call that? Well, maybe SFEI-net? Oh, okay, some of you are already laughing, foreshadowing. Not to worry, we're not going to build AI, into these things. So, sci-fi is rife with examples of bad robots, the Board, Terminator, Daleks, Yeah, that's from iRobot. It really corrupted Asimov, not even close to, the short stories there. But anyway, and real life, I would not like to meet that thing. I think they call it the Terminator or something like that. Anyway, so there's a lot of militaristic bad robots in real life, and but there are good robots too. Even your little vacuum sampler, he's a friendly robot. He's not going to kill you, right? And likewise, even your programmable cooker is sort of a robot. You tell it to a bunch of things, follow some temperature ramp, and then at a certain time deliver me dinner, right? And, the standard auto sampler is sort of a robot in itself. But why do we need to develop, they have auto samplers. Why do we need those? Well, commercial samplers, for one, really expensive, like $6,000 for, just a basic ISCO with like a single bottle. You can program it to get a pretty nice composite, but you only get one bottle, right? And then it's extra for extra. So if you want like sensors and other things like that, it costs more. So, $6,000 is just a starting point. They're pretty big. It goes about 2 feet by 1.5 feet. And then, again, it's sort of like you're captured into their ecosystem once you buy something. So, the tubing type and size, the bottle type and size, you're really limited. So we were inspired by one of the work group members from EPA, or was it USGS? Anyway, I suggested, we've developed a water sampler, auto sampler that they set out in the lakes, and they would co-locate them with fish being exposed. So then they would have, kind of corresponding data, water samples across a long time period, and then their fish samples. And the important thing was that it was submersible, which none of the commercial samplers could do. But we looked at it and say, well, okay, we could use maybe something like that with a few tweaks. And so our first generation was what we called the Mayfly auto sampler. Fairly low cost with a little bit of inflation, but it was based on Enviro DIY Mayfly board, which was made by the Stroud Center in Delaware, and it's meant as a citizen science monitor. So these watershed groups could set out these things in their streams and watch, flow level, temperature, depth, all sorts of things like that over time. And they had built this whole library of using different sensors, so you could just kind of find on their website kind of code, say, oh, I have this sensor, and just add it to your little setup. And we also changed the pump type from what the USGS used. And a decade later, we had lithium iron phosphate batteries, much lighter, higher capacity than the lead acid ones that USGS was using. And we also had a built-in LTE module. So it's a cellular connection, that the Mayfly guys developed, because that was their primary purpose, to kind of publish data to the web of stream conditions from, citizen science groups. So we adapted that, threw on some pumps, and first version was born. The great thing about that, of course, is these are all the deployment things. None of them are in the dark. It's not raining. And so, this is a joy, It's like you just go out, relatively nice weather, set it out. The water's not flowing at a screamingly dangerous rate. You set it up, go away, and it does its dirty work when you're sleeping. But things didn't go without some hitches. So this was one of our early deployments. We thought, oh, okay, we'll just weight it down with a cinder block. That should do. No. Cinder blocks can water ski. So we switched to barbell weights, much lower profile, more mass. And it did a little bit better. It didn't move as much. And then more learning curve issues. We discovered that the expandable cubitainers that we were using for some of the early samples had screaming high levels of BPA, which was one of the contaminants of existing concern, let's call it, that we're concerned about. Oops. And what else? The method of configuring it, we were editing text files that we were putting on the samplers. And of course, if you use the wrong editor, MS-DOS versus Mac versus Linux, and I made the mistake once, and some weird stray characters showed up. And then the sampler doesn't work because it says, what is this character? In one case, we even had device theft, so we set it up by Damon Slough in Oakland, and somebody said, ooh, a nice looking Pelican box. Cut it loose, left it in the parking lot when they discovered we'd had drilled 6 holes in it. And then finally, we also discovered that the cubitainers were a little bit subject to things that we never experienced. We did a lot of testing in the garage, and we overfilled them to 3.5, 4 liters. Never had a problem, but set that thing out in the sun on hot concrete, and it just starts bending, and a couple of them popped. So he said, no more cubitainers. So in the midst of all this, we were also thinking about, okay, we want to be able to make adjustments to the configurations on the fly. So, hey, it's got a cellular connection. Can we get it to look up new directions? So we wanted to basically add that function. Mark did a valiant effort trying to get ThinkSpeak or some other means to get the sampler to read off the web, but the Stroud guys had done such a great job of kind of making it very compact and low energy use, and he couldn't deconvolute what the hell was going on. So we gave up on that. And instead, Mark found a different processor, and it's the Onion Omega. It has built-in LTE and Wi-Fi, so we didn't have to buy a separate module. And it used Python programming, which a lot of staff and current, is pretty in vogue now. And so we built it to use two config file options. One, you put it directly on the card, and if you don't get any cellular connection, at least it has a basic starting point to work from. But ideally, if you get a connection, it goes to the web, tries to look up new directions, and updates itself. But now it's not using a Mayfly board, so we think, at least I was thinking, yeah, we shouldn't call it a Mayfly anymore. So a new name, so, sampler, FCI sampler number 2, boring, right? So I was thinking, okay, stay with the aquatic insects theme. It sucks liquid. What could it be? So that's what's born the mosquito. Some people are not a fan of that name, but I think it's appropriate. So mosquito weighs about 3 milligrams, right? And so it's omega board. Mega is 10 to the 6. So omega mosquito would be 10 to the 6 times bigger. 3 kilograms is about right. So I think it's apropos. So, oops. Yeah, okay. So, look at it and look at our sampler. All you need, add a thorax, abdomen, some wings, a couple of legs, and you have, something for an exterminator's truck top or perhaps a Burning Man exhibit. And I even came up with a branding campaign, a logo, and a slogan. So depending on how you want to read it, it's either pollution sucks or sucks pollution. And so on top of that, on top of sort of the overall brand name, we took inspiration from Minnesota, which had a snowplow naming contest. And so we made a Name That Sampler thing, which was the most hit site on our site for a bit. Finalists, we got a lot of entries, and 3 people independently submitted name of a certain adult film star whose name begins with Storm. But we figured we should stay clear of that because we don't want to be on some DOJ watch list, right? So anyway, my personal entry was Olive D80s. If you've ever watched VH1, you might know a show that sounds like that. But unfortunately, it didn't make the finalists. So Jay said I shouldn't blow through this. In practice, I just showed all our finalists. So we'll do sort of like the Steve Harvey Family Feud thing. Number 1, Little Sipper. Number 2, come on, people. Mississippi. So that covers our first 15 samplers. Congratulations, you made it through. Thanks for all the lovely entries. And of course, if you want, you can report me to the American Society for Prevention of Excessive Animations. So the sampler logic is very simple, right? No, actually a little bit simpler. Basically, every minute it checks, is it time to log? It reads the sensors, and then we do what Lorenzo called the gauntlet. We have a bunch of challenges. Is it the right time? Is the depth right? Is the salinity right? And if it does, then we pump, and if not, yes, we don't pump, right? And so it just kind of loops through this. So at the end, if we haven't filled this bottle enough, we quickly fill it with a catch-up fill. So here's an example of one of our collections, and you can see the red line is sort of the cumulative volume in the bottle, and it kind of smartly starts and stops. So when it met the conductivity, it started, and as the depth dropped too low, it stopped again. And then as the depth went up, it started again. And then as the conductivity went too high, it stopped again. So it can do pretty sophisticated things of starting and stopping, depending on the conditions to get the sampler we want. So, in the future, we're hoping to be able to get the flow proportional composite into a preset volume, but if it had AI and a voice synthesizer, it'd probably tell me. Because that requires like a crystal ball, which we don't have, right? But we're doing our best. So, we want to get a sample that's more or less good enough. And so we're getting like flow aware or flow influence, even if not strictly flow proportional samples. Even with the LTE updates, we're going to still have some misses, and things like that. So inevitably, during development, we're going to have, changes in the hardware of the tubing and the containers that we use, depending on what CECs we're looking for. We'll probably have to tweak the pump logic some because, there's situations that we're not fully anticipating. And then, our users will say, oh, I hate when you have to enter this or that. So we're going to do some configuration updates. And then, occasionally we find that certain orientations of the samplers don't work. And so we'll have to sort of adjust our field deployments a little bit too as well. And then last of all, of course, we're going to have to develop a method because we're not going to get perfect samples. And we'll have to say, hey, what's good enough for us, right? So we're also looking a little bit into alternative pump types. And so one of them was auto sampler using vacuum because a peristaltic pump grinds sort of this tubing and might introduce chemicals or particles into the samples. So we're looking at those for fixed stations. And, hopefully in the future, we'll be able to kind of do some adaptations to them. So questions and suggestions. So you can chat with the Donbot or you can chat with me. Thanks.
Could you speak to volume limitations? And if to the extent that there is it possible in the future that we could deploy multiple mosquitoes at one location?
Yeah. There's no problem with multiple mosquitoes. Well, limited by space, right? You can only fit so many. And there's not really a volume limitation. Like if we have a big enough bottle and enough battery capacity, it could collect 5 liters or whatever you want, right? So.
Hi, I have 2 quick questions. I am part of an agency where we actually do deploy the ISCO samplers for stormwater monitoring, so I found this very relatable and really interesting. The first question I had is, how do you time when you collect the sample? Do you try to get like the beginning of the storm, the middle of the storm? Because I know, you can't predict how long the storm is going to be, so you want to get like a representative sample, a flow-weighted composite, but you can't predict, how the flow is going, like, the actual flow rate and the specific length of the storm. So what do you guys, aim for to, even have a sample?
Yeah, so our first guess is sort of, each of the sips it takes is a certain percentage of the total bottle volume. And we say, okay, this is a 6-hour storm. We want to distribute it over those 6 hours. And then we're going to expect it to maybe be a little bit faster during high flow. And so we'll kind of try and balance sort of sip size and sip interval to kind of compensate for sort of different profiles of the storm, right?
So do you pre-program that, or do you program the robot to?
Yeah, we program the robot to respond to depth, right?
Oh,
And
okay.
so we have a depth trigger, say, okay, this is sort of the start of the storm. And then as the depth goes way high, then we say, oh, let's collect faster or collect bigger samples, right? So that's how we do it.
And then my second, oh, my
Time's up,
second
right.
question was about how do you tackle monitoring any parameters that have limited hold times? Like, do you ever monitor for bacteria or pH that has very, very short hold times?
Yeah, no, so far we're not doing, we do things that have like a couple days hold time at least, right, so far.
Okay.
All right, so we're going to switch gears a little bit and move outward in terms of our focus from just stormwater to more broadly CECs. And despite what the agenda said, I'm not just going to talk about sediment. So I'm going to start really broad and say overall, the RMP monitoring determines spatial patterns and long-term trends in contamination through sampling of a whole bunch of different matrices: water, sediment, fish, bird eggs, marine mammal tissues, and pathways, most commonly wastewater and stormwater. And we're some of the best in the world because we have both reactionary monitoring for legacy contaminants like PCBs and mercury, and also more anticipatory monitoring, which is things like CECs. So emerging contaminants is a very broad class or group of compounds. Anything that's under-regulated or not regulated at all, and is not typically monitored in the environment. So that covers a whole bunch of different things. And then we use a class-based approach to more efficiently address all of the hundreds of thousands of chemicals that are currently in use that could potentially be considered emerging contaminants if they make it into the environment and have the potential to harm aquatic ecosystems or human health. So we put our Bay monitoring data in context for our stakeholders and for ourselves as scientists. The computer is like very quietly talking and it's very distracting. Okay, so with what we call a tiered risk-based framework for emerging contaminants. So contaminants for which we have sufficient in-bay data get placed within one of the tiers in this tiered risk-based framework. And each tier has associated monitoring and management recommendations. And as you go up in tiers, those become more, they take more effort and resources. And then for many contaminants, we don't have sufficient occurrence information or hazard information. And so these get placed in this fifth possible concern category and then are further prioritized for future monitoring based on things like whether there are available analytical methods that are sensitive enough, and also reports of detections of them in other places and increases in use, that sorts of thing. So here are all of the chemicals and classes that we've placed in the tiered risk-based framework so far. And while this covers many chemicals, there's still hundreds of thousands of chemicals in use. And so this is only a small fraction of all of the chemicals that are potentially out there and could maybe be of concern. We don't know. So how do we handle that? One of the key elements that we use to direct our emerging contaminants work is non-targeted analysis. So we use non-targeted analysis to identify new potential contaminants of concern, and then also as a measure of assurance that the RMP is not missing unexpected yet potentially harmful contaminants just because we failed to predict that they would be there. So if you think about traditional targeted monitoring, that involves going out into the environment, taking a sample with a known list of chemicals that you're looking for, that have been pre-selected, and then you're only going to see what you're looking for, those chemicals. So if you think of that as kind of like a flashlight, it's very bright and has a small area that it's looking at. Non-targeted analysis, in comparison, is kind of more like a lamp, where the light is dimmer but broader. So we can see more of the chemicals that are out there. There's still darkness around the edges. It's broader, but it's dimmer. We don't necessarily get quantitative information. Sometimes what we're getting is pretty tentative, but it is a kind of different way of looking at what's out in the environment. And so we've taken this approach to use this type of study to guide our monitoring for a long time, starting over 20 years ago. And so these are example projects that we have done that involve non-targeting. You can see sediment is just one of many, and I'm gonna quickly walk through them. So our very first effort in this field involved analysis of samples of water, sediment, and bivalves that were taken between 1990 and 2000 to proactively identify potential problem contaminants. And many of the contaminants that were identified by this work, it was a while ago now, have since been addressed through source control management actions. So for example, PBDEs, or organophosphate pesticides, are no longer really a concern in the Bay. They were first seen in this project. There are other contaminants that were first observed with this project that we are still concerned about and periodically monitor for, and that's things like phthalates and nonylphenol. So that's a great example of seeing lots of new things to focus on. Sometimes these projects don't actually yield a lot of new contaminants for future study. So one example is this collaboration with the National Institute of Standards and Technology, or NIST, that analyzed harbor seal blubber and mussel samples that were collected in 2010 and 2011. And most of the identified compounds in this study were actually either legacy pollutants that we already knew about, or they were halogenated compounds that have been widely reported in the literature around the world and are actually thought to be naturally occurring from marine bacteria. And we did see a few PAHs and other emerging contaminants, but for the most part, this study kind of gave us a different outcome, which is an indication that we were not missing important fat-soluble contaminants in our targeting monitoring efforts. So we didn't see anything new and exciting, and that was a good thing. So a bit more recently, non-targeted analysis of bay water samples led to a really big paradigm shift in our thinking about contaminant pathways to the bay for emerging contaminants. This study helped us recognize urban stormwater runoff as a really important pathway for investigating further for several classes of emerging contaminants. And the sampling design was that there were samples collected in 2016 from 3 different sites in the bay that are predominantly influenced by different pathways. And then we worked with our emerging contaminants work group advisor, Lee Ferguson at Duke University, to do this non-targeted analysis. And one of the compounds that we observed for the first time in this study was 1,3-diphenylguanidine, or DPG. And DPG is used as an accelerator in the vulcanization of rubber. And one of the main sources of DPG is tires. So it's widely and abundantly detected in roadway runoff and other tire rubber affected environments. And because of this observation, Lee introduced us to some folks in the Pacific Northwest who are in this image that I think Becky took this photo, we're working on a mystery. The question of what was causing salmon mortality in the runoff in the Pacific Northwest. And this led us to collaborate with these folks, Ed Cologe and his collaborators, and we're still working with them today. And Because of this collaboration, we had a very small part in the discovery of 6-ppd quinone, which is the causal agent of urban runoff mortality syndrome in coho salmon. And I think Becky and Alicia are both authors on the big list of authors in the paper that announced the discovery of 6-ppd quinone. And Bay RMP data is included in that paper. And our monitoring data later was used by the California Department of Toxic Substances Control as some of the evidence they needed to list 6-ppd in motor vehicle tires as a priority product under their Safer Consumer Products regulation. So this is leading California to be one of the leaders of removing this toxic contaminant at its source. So I'm not going to completely skip over sediment. So meanwhile, while all this amazing stormwater work was happening, we were also applying non-targeted analysis to sediment samples. Sediment is hypothesized to be an important sink for pollutants entering San Francisco Bay. It tends to sorb more hydrophobic contaminants. So we thought, oh, maybe it will have a pretty different profile from the water non-targeted analysis. So in 2017 and 2018, sediment samples from both the margins, the edges of the bay, and the more central South Bay were collected. And then we worked with 2 different labs that have kind of different non-targeted analysis methods that target different chemical spaces. Eunha Ho at San Diego State University, and then Lee again at Duke. And we detected over 680 unique compounds, and many of them were in classes that we have targeted monitoring for. But we did notice some classes that we hadn't done a lot of monitoring for, including siloxanes and dyes. So those are now on our list of things we're interested in potentially monitoring in the future because of the non-targeted analysis. And I was really hoping to be able to announce a brand new fact sheet on non-targeted analysis and sediment and give you a QR code to see it, but our design team is overrun by amazing SFEI projects and they didn't have time to finish it. So instead I just have this coming soon. But it does give me a chance to announce that something else is coming soon in my life, which is I'm gonna have a baby in a few weeks. And so I will be out in November and December. And so you may not see this fact sheet until January, sorry. Thank you. We've done all this amazing non-targeted work. A lot of those results just kind of sit in spreadsheets and get forgotten about. So we had this little project to combine all this information together into one resource. So this included the bay water monitoring and wastewater non-target analysis from the project I talked about with Lee, the 2 different sediment methodologies, and then also some stormwater non-targeted monitoring that Ed Cologe did kind of pro bono, playing with the samples we were sending him for targeted monitoring. So we've combined all of that together. We now have this one spreadsheet that we can see what has been detected in which matrix, and it's a great resource for if our stakeholders or our science advisors or in our literature review, we notice a new compound, we can look and say, have we ever noticed this in the bay? And I also think it's gonna be a really great resource for comparison with some of our upcoming ongoing non-targeted analysis projects, which I'm gonna talk about now. So we have a lot of ongoing non-targeted analysis work. 2 of those projects are in biota. We have a project in harbor seals and then a project in sportfish. And both of these are looking for specifically PFAS and then also other unknown halogenated compounds in biota. So for this work, we're partnering with Bernie Crimmins, who has done a lot of amazing non-targeted analysis work in Great Lakes fish. And then Eunha, again, who's done a lot of non-target analysis in Southern California marine mammals. So we're hoping to be able to compare our data with these other regions and also be able to compare with the other matrices in that non-targeted spreadsheet that I mentioned. And then we're also incorporating non-targeted analysis into our status and trends monitoring. So this past dry season, just pretty recently, we did our once every 2 years water cruise, and we collected many samples for lots of different analyses, but one of them one of the analyses is for non-target analysis. And then we've also collected some limited wastewater samples, and then we're this coming wet season collecting stormwater samples as well. And all of these will be analyzed by the same lab, Tom Young at UC Davis. We're excited to work with him and have all this status and trends chemistry to compare with our non-targeted analysis, because that might give us some new insights. And then we're also kind of piloting for the first time pairing non-targeted analysis and bioassays to help guide our compound identification towards more bioactive compounds. So not just what is there, but what is there and might have an effect on the organisms. And we're working with Tom Young, which is exciting because the Swamp Spot program is also working with him to do a very similar analysis. So we'll also maybe be able to compare what we're seeing here in the Bay Area with what they're seeing more broadly over all of California. So some key takeaways. The RMP has been a leader in successfully incorporating non-target analysis for quite some time. And while this is becoming more frequently used as a tool, it's still pretty rare. So we're really at the cutting edge of science and a leader in the world in this area. And non-target analysis is an important tool that we can use to help identify potential new contaminants of concern that we haven't really thought about, and then also assess whether our current targeted monitoring is really actually capturing what all is there. And we're doing so much non-targeted analysis, so you'll probably hear a lot about it in the future in biota, in our status and trends work, which covers a wide variety of different matrices. So with that, if you are like my almost 4-year-old, you probably have a lot of questions.
Fascinating stuff. You kind of tantalized us with a potential inquiry in comparing sediment to water to see if there was a difference because of the hydrophobic nature. But you didn't answer your question about where you're going with that, or did you get any results?
Yeah, so the quick answer is yes, there is a difference. There's more hydrophobic stuff in the sediment compared to in the water. There's not as much overlap between the detections of all the different matrices as you might expect. So we are seeing pretty different chemicals in the sediment and in the water. And I will say that a challenge with non-targeted analysis is that if you see something, then you can tentatively know that it's there. But if you don't see something, that doesn't mean it's not there. So the sample preparation methods can really change what chemical space you're recovering in terms of what chemicals you can detect. So you have to do kind of specific methods to see PFAS, for example. So our not PFAS focused non-targeted analysis doesn't see a lot of PFAS chemicals, even though our targeted analysis, we do see those. So it's a measure of assurance that we're covering things, but it's not like perfect and comprehensive necessarily. So I think there's not very much overlap, and that may be because of differences in the chemical methodology. But to be perfectly honest, I'm not an analytical chemist, and I don't know some of these details.
Thanks, Ezra. Just curious in terms of the ability to evaluate any quantifiable data on the non-targeted. Is it just presence, absence, or is there any kind of order of magnitude?
Yeah, so it kind of depends on the specific methodology. Non-targeted analysis can be totally just presence, absence, and it can also be sort of semi-quantitative. So oftentimes So for example, with the sediment work that is coming, I promise, it's sort of semi-quantitative in that you can tell relative amounts between samples, but you can't necessarily tell relative amounts between compounds. So you can say that compound A is present in this sample more than in this sample, but you cannot compare compound A and compound B, if that makes sense. So like there's no actual concentrations, you're just getting relative amounts of each individual compound compared to itself.
Thanks.
Okay, so thank you. Let's thank Ezra. And Ezra will take a seat and come on up. Matt, or down, Matt and Don. And we can open the floor for questions for all of our panelists. I can't help but weigh in though. You said it, I want to say it again, that our regional monitoring program is the premier user of non-target analysis, perhaps on the planet. I think we might, as a monitoring program, we probably do more than all other programs combined because it's people are afraid of it. The academics aren't, they're exploring it. But a key aspect of non-target analysis, the more it's done, the better it gets because we start building these libraries that help us transition from semi-quantitative to more quantitative because the machines only know what we can tell them is there. You know, they can't tell, that's the idea about this. And there's a lot of things show up on a chromatograph that aren't identified in conventional analysis. That's the whole idea, is trying to figure out what those things are. So I feel really good about that. That's why it's included now in our status and trends program. We're feeling that good about it. You know, we're not worried about regulating, we're worried about informing what we should be taking action on. So with that, let's open the floor for some questions for this great panel. Anything about stormwater monitoring, modeling, emerging contaminant program in general? Come on.
Ezra, just kind of building on what Tom was saying, can you give us a sense of how much NTA is used throughout the world? And is there a international database that's been built to compare NTA results? And then kind of the final question is, could AI help us in NTA in the future?
There you go. Yep, you're green.
Okay, great. I do know how to use a microphone. So as Tom said, people are afraid of it. So lots of academics are doing non-target analysis and very few other people are doing it. It's getting picked up a little bit more here and there. So Swamp Spot is a great example that they're diving into this world. But yeah, it's not a frequent tool of non-academic spaces. That said, there are people who dabble in it occasionally besides us, and there are beginning to be some of these like databases. So a great example is the Norman network. It seems like it ought to be an acronym, but I don't think it is. That is more used in Europe, but it is basically anyone who has done non-target analysis can submit their results. And so it's a big list of chemicals that have been detected in other places. So I've used that as a comparison for our sediment data in a manuscript that is coming at some point. So that's one example. And then your third question, I've now forgotten. Oh, AI. Yeah, I don't know. I personally am not a big fan of AI for a number of reasons, but I could see it potentially being useful because one of the big challenges with non-target analysis is that you get this giant list of chemical structures and names, and then you have to do something with that. So there's not any sort of automated way right now of taking that and then identifying like this is used in this product or in this industrial process or whatever, or this is a naturally occurring chemical that you see. You have to do that all kind of by hand right now. And there were some folks at EPA working on automating some of that, and I don't know, I haven't heard anything about what's happened there, so I have no idea. It hasn't been published or anything yet. I have dabbled in trying to do that, but it's a lot of work looking up all these chemicals. And so AI to sort of start to do some of that might be really useful. And then even like with all the information we have, there's still a lot of chemicals where we don't know what they're from. Like, is this a natural chemical? Is this from some human influence? Is this some kind of transformation product of some other contaminant? So I have a big chunk of things that are just unknowns, and AI could potentially start to match structures or something. There's definitely room for that space, and I am not the person to do it.
It seems like the approach has been, let's say we detect something in the waters, 6 ppd. Oh, where is it coming from? It's from tires. Why not like target everything that are, all the chemicals that are in tires? We know they are going to be everywhere, right? Urban, non-urban. I mean, is there a place where it's done? Where we actually know what's in a tire, because even if it's, let's say they get replaced, they're going to be replaced with something that is probably going to be also as toxic, if not more.
Yeah, so that's a great question. No is the short answer. No, there's some effort to think proactively about what is in products and could that then become a contaminant. We actually are working on a little bit of that in the PFAS sphere ourselves, of thinking about what are in products and could those PFAS then end up in the bay. The 6 ppd quinone example is actually a great example of why this isn't perfect or isn't really done, which is that 6 ppd quinone is the toxic to salmon and maybe other organisms contaminant. It's not actually an ingredient in tires. It's the transformation product of an ingredient in tires. So just looking at the list of ingredients in tires, you wouldn't necessarily realize that one of them transforms into something that is acutely toxic to aquatic life. So it's kind of an added challenge that you can look at the source chemicals used in various products like tires or whatever, but that doesn't necessarily give you the full picture of what might end up in the environment, because those chemicals can transform once they enter the environment, and the transformation products could end up being more toxic than the parent compound.
Okay.
So, I mean, that would be great, and it's complicated and challenging, and so non-targeted analysis is one more tool in our big toolbox to try and help deal with the hundreds of thousands of compounds that could be entering the environment and could potentially be a concern.
Yeah. Ezra, I actually expected a slightly different answer, but I like how you answered it broadly, because we do have a targeted list of tire contaminants that has been revealed. So what you're just being cautious about, there's a lot more possibilities, but we do, especially with our collaboration with Ed, Clogy, and all that, there's a target list, but that's not a complete list, is really what you're saying. You have to be careful about targeting and thinking you got it figured out, because there's the degradants and other things. Okay, come on, we got time for more. And
Matt, I was curious about I'm going to have to get some modeling questions in here. I was curious about the use of the watershed dynamic model for the Petaluma River climate adaptation. I wonder if you could speak a little bit more about that and how you see that potentially being used elsewhere. Like, what are you looking for?
So that particular project it's a bunch of different funders, and it's part of the Sediment Solutions project. The idea being that we need a lot more sediment to build up our marshes to keep pace with climate change and sea level rise, and that sediment from the watershed, which we historically think of as a pollutant, is also a resource. And it's looking at a bunch of different scenarios. So with basically what we've done is take a bunch of global circulation model, the big climate models, downscaled for California, and taken that climate weather data and put it into our watershed model to see what happens. And because we can predict flow and sediment, and with increasing storm intensity, we see an increase in some areas of sediment runoff, and which is complicated to manage because it is both a resource and a pollutant, and then looking at different scenarios of how that could play out. And it's all across the map because it depends on the climate scenario that's going to happen. It also depends on the model. But in general, we see the trend is at the end of the century, more sediment coming, more frequent and intense storms, more sediment coming from watersheds. And that's a lot of the things that we're doing with green stormwater infrastructure can be a hedge against that and help make our watersheds more resilient to climate change. And so, like, even if you don't believe in climate change and it doesn't turn out to happen, we can do all these great things in our watersheds anyway that'll have a lot of benefit for, restoring pre-development flows and mitigating pollutants. So that's an exciting project. We've got a big technical advisory committee meeting tomorrow. And the report's probably, 6 months or a year out, I suppose.
Hi, Wes Heim, Moss Landing Marine Labs, and I'd like to thank all the panelists for presenting today. It was really great presentations. My question's for Don and the Mega Mosquito and crew with all the great names. And what's your biggest challenge over the next year to kind of get towards scaling up that great map that you put where you could deploy all these robots at one time during a storm?
Yeah, so right now we have, as you saw, 15 samplers, and we're kind of learning on the fly, sort of how to install and how not to install. So, we'll set it out and, some of them will get washed out a little bit. So we have to think about alternative mounting configurations and things like that. And then occasionally we see like these weird, programming things where, we'll have to kind of diagnose post-storm. But right now, if the install stays in place, we're doing pretty good because last year we got about 8 to 10 samples with only 4 samplers. And so with 15 now, we're hoping to get 30 some. And then we build out more and get more familiar with installations. Hopefully we'll get faster. And, with 1 or 2 teams, we'll set out the dozen or so that we have active.
Before, Don, can you speak potential future as we hopefully successfully demonstrate the utility of this monitoring tool? We could establish partnerships in a sustainable network. I mean, we're really in pilot mode, demonstration mode, a lot of great work, but there's a limitation on staffing capacity and R&D resources, but in collaboration with municipalities, other entities that have interest in watershed monitoring, we have a lot of possibility, right?
Yeah, definitely. I think we're putting all the coding up on GitHub, when we kind of get it semi-solidified, even at this point, anybody who's interested can kind of download and copy and build on what we have. We're going to put up, plans, report probably on construction, materials, whatever that, people can take pieces and adapt as they need, So I think it'll be a great opportunity for a collaborative effort. I'm thinking sort of the whole Mayfly thing was like a community. They had a forum and had people asking, oh, I want to install this sensor instead, what do I need to do? And, they can get coding help, internally and externally. So I think that kind of model in my mind, engages people and we can leverage off different groups' efforts.
Hi, my question is for Matt, and I'm going to preface this by saying I'm not a modeler. So you were talking about how you're going to take the watershed model to feed into the bay model to feed into the biota model, I think it was. So you've got model feeding into model. How are you approaching, or are you concerned about compounding uncertainties from each model into the next model? Like, how are you going to address that?
Oh man, that's a great question. Yes, as a modeler, we're always concerned about, what's the accuracy of our models, what's the sort of range of outputs that we're producing. So we do have budget for doing uncertainty analysis. And so we would run the model with a bunch of different feasible input parameters. And so instead of just getting a number as an output, you get a range of numbers. And you can cascade that forward through the different models. And so, yeah, it might be, instead of just a single prediction for the future of what's in 30 years from now, what's going to be the mercury concentration in fish tissue, we would have a range, like a 90% confidence interval, for example. Hopefully that's something you'll see in our future reports.
It won't be hopeful, it will. No, but Deirdre, it's an excellent question, because what we're doing is making sure we're doing smart modeling in conjunction with smart monitoring. And part of that is smart interpretation of results and avoiding misinterpretation. And a lot of it has to do with just recognizing there's a lot of uncertainty in trying to understand the environment. And we've got a great team, and we've got a great bunch of advisors to ensure good peer review of things. So that's why the more participation we have, the better we all are, because we want people to ask questions about how certain are you with that prediction? And then he'll give you that smart response. So we've reached the end of our time for this session. Let's thank the panelists. They're still... And so we're now starting a 20-minute break. So please go, we still have refreshments, but let's try to get back